The King of Podcasts Radio Network proudly presents the Broadcasters Podcast, where we dive deep into the media industry headlines and dissect the digital disruption that diverges the masses into the new media counterculture and away from the media establishment. Here is the King of Podcasts.
When you ask yourself, is it really worth it to be in the corporate structure of media, whatever media company that you're in? Well, I can tell you no. I've been part of that because I actually have been in the corporate structure of a newspaper, a TV station, and a radio station. And from my account, it's too much to deal with. And the truth is that you start seeing a seeping, issues of controversy, conspiracy, and conflict that can reel its ugly head at any time when you're in a corporate media structure. And there are several occasions like that we're going to talk about here on the Broadcasters Podcast, and it's a lesson to all of you out there. This is not anything political. This is not anything to bash. It really is a case study in what I call a corporate media crisis of controversy, conspiracy, and conflict. So we're going to dissect the case study in several areas. There are three areas we're going to talk about. Last week we talked about Neil Young and taking his catalog off of Spotify. Well, India RE, the R&B artist, and Crosby, Stills, and Nash have also followed suit, along with Joni Mitchell. Then you have comments that were made this week by Whoopi Goldberg on The View about the Holocaust and race, which I'm not going to get into that part, but we'll take what the stories are given out there talking about it. And then Jeff Zucker, the president of CNN, the cable news network, resigning because of a consensual relationship that he did not disclose to management or to his team, to his bosses. And this has created quite a storm in corporate media, which is not what these companies want. When you talk about CNN, or you talk about ABC or Disney or Spotify and all that's going around that. It's a lot they're going to take in. We're going to go into all that right now in the program. Thanks for listening and subscribing and sharing the show as you always do, and for letting people know about it. And if you're listening in, I really do appreciate it. If you found this show, thank you for listening in. I always want to get feedback. If there's something else you want me to talk about here on the program that you like better than others, please let me know. So please email me, kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. I know, don't judge me on the yahoo.com address, but it's just a place to go. kingofpodcasts@yahoo.com. I really appreciate that. Now let's start things off with Jeff Zucker, who's the most recent story that's out there. And, when I look at the story with Jeff Zucker, I just say to myself, there's obviously a very political side that would love to see what happened to Jeff Zucker happen today. And I'm sure they're celebrating right now. I got it. Right. I don't care about that. This is not the part where I'm going to go political here. This is an apolitical show, and I will continue to make it as such. But what I will say about this was he didn't disclose everything. That's what happened. There's a part where, there is some kind of protection when you are that high of a level. And Jeff Zucker, before CNN, had a very lengthy career in broadcasting. Let's just say that as well. We know that as well. So even if he does get let go here, I don't think he's going to be, on the beach for too long. I think he's going to get picked up by somebody else. I just feel like that's going to happen. So I'm going to take this story from Deadline.com. Jeff Zucker had a surprise resignation on CNN for Wednesday, triggering public questions over what led to his ouster after revelations of his relationship with Alison Gollust, the executive vice president and chief marketing officer for CNN Worldwide. So he had a consensual relationship, they said, with Alison Gollust, who is very much a high C-level ranked executive officer within CNN. One CNN anchor, Alison Camerata, who does the New Day show, I believe it is, she said on air it feels wrong, she says that two consenting adults who are both executives could not have a private relationship. Yes, Alison, you're correct. I agree with you on that. But the part is that it was disclosing it. And he has a contract which has that policy. It's not, listen, when you're at that high a level and you're at that kind of status, part of the thing is he did divorce from his wife a couple of years ago. I mean, who cares about when this relationship with Allison came up? But it did. And if he decided to go ahead and to have relations with someone, and he felt you're working a lot of long hours in the same building together in Atlanta or New York or wherever he's at, and he felt in this situation, he needs to at least say something, and you hope that the relationship that he's trying to have with someone in there is something that's a proper one, because stockholders care, because the media cares. He's enough of a media figure that he needs to go ahead and be open about it. So this is where, you can almost think of like the public relations or human resources and say, look, I don't want to make a big deal out of this, but I've been seeing Allison for a while. We are in a relationship. That's all I want to say about that. Is there a problem with that? That's it. I don't think there's anything else to say. But there's also other things that are going to be said that this story could have been held on for a long time. Like, we didn't know when they knew about this. We obviously knew that they probably knew something about this for a long time. People had to have known. This couldn't have been completely blindsided at all, okay? Even if the relationship itself is not what triggered the CEO of Warner Media, Jason Kilar, to call Zucker in recent days informing him he had to exit or face termination, it was Zucker's failure to disclose the relationship in violation of Warner Media policy. And only days after Kilar was informed of Zucker's omissions by outside lawyers, probing the now fired Chris Cuomo's stint at CNN, the executive told Zucker and told him, "You can't remain here." Okay, that's why this got so bad. It's because the company had to find out through lawyers investigating another issue under Zucker's watch. Regardless of what people think about what Chris Cuomo did and how Zucker and his team might have handled it at the time, that's neither here nor there. But the way they found out and the fact of what it was, and he never, if you're going to do things, you have to have confidence in, as the executive here. Jeff Zucker has to have the confidence in his people, upper echelon management, his bosses. He has to have trust with them. I understand if you got to hold things up from the rest of your team, you're under the team underneath you. I get that part. But if you can't have a real constructive or very open and transparent dialogue with your bosses, you're not going to do well up there. You have to have those talks. So I don't know what was going on there, why he didn't do that. But that's something that's a very important lesson for those of you out there, that when you have your business, when you're doing business or you're doing anything in a corporate setting, whenever you're going to go up there, to be careful of what you're doing when it comes to, it's like an Olympic Village. Hey, you find other people that are like-minded like you, that are familiar to what you do for a living, and maybe there's something that creates a spark. And maybe there's something where both of you feel like, okay, you know what? We want to do something outside of work. We've all had those work relationships, friendships that we have at work, the associations with maybe somebody of the opposite sex or somebody that we're just interested in. And maybe we just, we feel we'd love to go and pursue a relationship with them outside of the office. Sometimes people will just do the thing and say, oh, you know what? I'm going to leave this job so that I can just still go out with you. So I could still, we can still have a relationship because I don't want to ruffle any feathers. And that's what happened here. Now, in the story now, they say that the stern and brief exchange between Kilar and Zucker was the climax of a never-smooth relationship between the one-time Hulu CEO and the ex-NBC Universal CEO. They weren't fire and ice. They were fire and gasoline. CNN insider that spoke to Deadline spoke of Kilar and Zucker's interactions since the former took over as the latter boss upon being named Warner CEO in May 2020 by the new CEO coming up of AT&T, John Stankey. Zucker wasn't pleased when there was a reorganization of Warner Media in the early fall of 2020, split who Goldust reported to. Now, in the marketing role, Goldust still answered directly to the CNN president, but her communications position, the executive reported to Warner Media's executive vice president, Christy Halbeger, Goles currently remains in her CNN gig. So she stayed in her job. Killar did discuss the Zucker situation with Stanky in the past 72 hours before calling CNN and calling Zucker on the departure. Meanwhile, at higher levels, there's been a heavy dose of consternation surrounding Zucker's exit, given the pending Discovery combination with Warner Media. This affects the deal with Discovery Networks right now that is going after CNN. Now, John Malone, who's the largest shareholder of Discovery, he's a critic of CNN. He made it known that there were corporate procedures that had to be followed to the letter in regards to Zucker. And being that Warner Media standards of business conduct require disclosure of relationships that develop with a boss and a subordinate, so it's not even underlings, it's bosses with subordinate. It's protecting the subordinates from the boss, right? Zucker's exit leaves the man who will lead a new company, David Zaslav, while the network facing a host of challenges without Zucker to provide institutional memory and guidance. And Zucker's relationship with Goles had been long since a source of rumor and speculation. Former network figures discovered as an open secret, and Katie Couric addressed it in her most recent memoir. The Radar Line published an item about the clandestine romance, describing it as a complication to the legal wrangling with Chris Cuomo's representatives. And in the story, they said, quote, as part of the investigation into Chris Cuomo's tenure at CNN, I was asked about a consensual relationship with my closest colleague, someone I worked with for more than 20 years, Zucco said in a memo to staffers, and he sent this out 11 a.m. Wednesday. He said, quote, I acknowledge the relationship evolved in recent years. I was required to disclose it when it began, but I didn't. I was wrong, end quote. And as reference to Cuomo quickly triggered speculation that the former CNN anchor fired in December was exacting some kind of payback as he hired an attorney, Brian Friedman, to secure the remaining money on his contract. So could this be a thing where Cuomo, through lawyers, decided to go ahead and enact a measure that was going to expose Jeff Zucker as revenge? Well, if you're going to burn somebody, make sure you don't get burned back, I guess. Now, in this here, in other words, if Cuomo broke company policy, so did Zucker. CNN's Brian Stelter said on the air on Wednesday that a source told him that Cuomo, isn't it funny that CNN's talking about their own palace intrigue? That's incredible. Cuomo, upset over his treatment, was quote-unquote trying to burn the place down. I don't think it was probably that, but come on. CNN, this is a little exaggerated, okay? Come on. According to sources familiar with what happened, an attorney from the law firm CNN and Warner Media hired to investigate Zucker, Cravath, Swain, and Moore, that's the law firm, they asked Zucker and Goles about the relationship. Even though both are divorced, the problem was that under company policy, it should have been disclosed a year earlier, according to a source familiar with the matter. Yeah, just tell them. The attorney contacted Killar, telling him that there was a problem with Zucker's answers. And when the West Coast-based Warner Media CEO confronted East Coast-set Zucker. Now, there's much more in here. They're talking about there's a sprawling by an individual close to events that the investigation into Chris Cuomo and his CNN interaction with former Governor of New York Andrew Cuomo, his brother, remains ongoing. However, even though the younger Cuomo hired Friedman, the lawyer, right after he was pink-slipped on December 5th last year, there have been no court filings on the pursuit of an $18 million payout for the former primetime host. That's it. So I'm telling you what. Now, in the story they talk about this here, they say that there was a letter that was a standard letter from the attorneys asking CNN and Warner Media for a preservation of relevant evidence. And nothing about Allison Goles was even brought up in that letter. And the note asked for safeguarding of documents, including correspondence related to any appearances by Andrew Cuomo on CNN. And, it was just on the Cuomo story with him and his brother. That's it. Nothing about Zucker. Now, Zucker's exit, they say that it comes at an inopportune time because there is now the launch of the subscription streaming service CNN. The traditional network has seen a huge viewership drop in the last couple of years, and no permanent host has been found for Chris Cuomo's old time slot at 9 p.m. Eastern. Most of all, the pending Discovery Warner Media transaction and what will happen at CNN after it closes. Zaslav, we talked about earlier, who will lead the combined company, was looking to have Zucker serve as advisor. Something was a cover to the network's workforce, as that would mean that the ex-CNN leader would continue to play a role in its future. And now, CNN staffers did have a meeting with Jason Killar in the Washington, D.C. bureau, including some of the network's best-known anchors on Wednesday night. in what source called a shit show. One after another, on-air personalities spoke up, some expressing their dismay at how Kalar handled the situation and their loyalty towards Zucker. Look at that. They were all loyal to him. Kalar, quote-unquote, had no understanding of what we do as reporters and journalists, end quote, and the attacks that the network has faced in the past 5 years. Participants were described as livid over what happened, and Jake Tapper asked whether they were giving in to Chris Cuomo's payback. Even the journalists are starting to act on their own. It's like they're picking up a story. And Warner Media does not want to comment any further about the story. Wow. What a mess. You have this new streaming service, and the person that has been behind CNN, and I'm trying to figure out how long was he there for at that moment. Like, I'm trying to figure out. January 2013, he'd been there almost 10 years. And through everything, he saw CNN, oversaw it, CNN International, Headline News, and CNN Digital. And he was president of CBS, a CEO of NBC Universal. My thing is, I believe that he's still going to be found somewhere else to work at after all this blows away. I don't see how that he does go away. There's just too much that the guy knows, and he would be brought into the fold somewhere else. I really believe that's going to happen with him. But yeah, and now they're going to have, well, there was the tense meeting that happened with them. Then there's, the resignation. And now there are 3 other executives that are going to be taking the role of what Jeff Zucker was doing to fill the role until somebody is brought on as CEO once again, or as president of CNN once again. The other story that also caught some big headlines and really stirred some shit is Whoopi Goldberg. Now, this is still less a thing, but Whoopi Goldberg is a long-standing celebrity figure. You're talking about somebody that isn't, what do they call it, an EGOT, right? She's won a Grammy, an Oscar, and a Tony Award. So, I mean, she's entrepreneur. I mean, there's a lot. I remember I got to speak with her when she spoke with Dr. Dina on Cannabis Confidential on CannabisRadio.com, which is a show that was on there. And I got to go and talk to her as Dr. Dina talked to Whoopi, and they talked about a new CBD product line at the time, Whoopi and Maya. And that was a project she did with Maya Elizabeth, who had done a lot of projects and all in the cannabis industry. And that's long been done, but she's continued to be, somewhere entrenched in the cannabis industry in some way or form. I forget what she's working on now, but I believe she's on another project. But anyway, Whoopi Goldberg made some comments regarding race and the Holocaust. I'm really not sure where, I never did try to look as to why the story initially came out and why she decided to go ahead and make this go on. There was a lot to be said there, but I'm not going to go and look back and see what she actually, I guess we're going to bring it up. Here's the thing. So she misspoke, she says, and says that, let me see here. Now, here's what they had the story about. Okay, this is on January 31st from Deadline. While discussing the controversy over a Tennessee school district banning Art Spiegelman's Pulitzer Prize-winning and somewhat graphic novel Mouse in schools, Whoopi Goldberg would say on the View on Monday that the Holocaust, quote-unquote, was not about race. She got immediate pushback from the show's other hosts, and shortly thereafter, from the Anti-Defamation League, the Auschwitz Memorial, and the Holocaust Museum. She said this, quote, "If you're going to do this, then let's be truthful about it, because the Holocaust isn't about race. No, it's not about race." And Joy Behar would retort, "Then what is it about?" She says, "Man's inhumanity to man. These are 2 white groups of people." Then Jonathan Greenblatt, the CEO of the Anti-Defamation League, would write, "No, Whoopi, the Holocaust was about the Nazis' systematic annihilation of the Jewish people. They dehumanized them and used this racist propaganda to justify slaughtering 6 million Jews. Holocaust distortion is dangerous." Holocaust Museum US says, "Racism, quote, was central to Nazi ideology. Jews were not defined by religion, but by race. Nazi racist beliefs fueled genocide and mass murder." Then the Auschwitz Memorial retweeted a chart outlining the Nazi pseudo-scientific division of people into races, forming a basis for the racial policies of Nazi Germany. So, nevertheless, she spoke ill-informed. And then she writes back and says, on Twitter, on today's show, I said the Holocaust is not about race, but about man's humanity of man. I should have said it was about both. As Jonathan Greenblatt from the Anti-Defamation League shared, he said that the Jewish people around the world have always had my support and that will never waver. I'm sorry for the hurt I have caused, with my sincerest apologies. Yeah, that was not good. Then ABC Network had to go ahead and, do something to just get the apology. In this day and age, you just can't just take an apology and then move along. It upset too many people and probably too many viewers of their show. Thus, action was taken, and now she's been suspended for 2 weeks from The View for, quote, wrongful and hurtful Holocaust comments. ABC News President Kim Godwin made the point that I'm suspending Whoopi Goldberg for 2 weeks for her wrongful and wrong and hurtful comments. While Whoopi has apologized, I've asked her to take time to reflect and learn about the impact of her comments. And the news organization, ABC, stands in solidarity with our Jewish colleagues, friends, families, and communities. So that's what they decided to go and do there and switch. Now, Deadline obtained a longer memo that Godwin sent to the staff at ABC saying her comments, Whoopi's comments, were misinformed, quote, upsetting and hurtful, and affirmed that words matter and we must be cognizant of the impact our words have. Now, I've talked about before, there's a coddling. Listen, people can get get a microaggression. They can be easily triggered and offended. This is a pretty big offense. This is one thing that, it's like on radio, you just don't talk about abortion on the air. It's just not a good idea. It's also the same thing where Holocaust is a taboo subject. Like, if it wasn't this story, I would never talk about the Holocaust. Never. Not on your life. You want me to go ahead and lose all my audience or really just piss people off? A pass. And what's funny is that Monday night, there was a late show with Stephen Colbert where she appeared, and this was before she issued her apology, but she repeated the same argument with Colbert and said she didn't want to fake apologize just because people were angry. She said on the show, quote, it upset a lot of people, which was never, ever, ever my intention. I feel being black, when we talk about race, it's a very different thing to me. So I said I thought the Holocaust wasn't about race. And people got very angry and still are angry. I'm getting a lot of mail from folks and a lot of real anger. But I thought it was a salient discussion because as a black person, I think of race as something that I can see. So I see you and I know what race you are. I thought it was more about man's inhumanity to man, but people were really angry and said, no, we are a race. I felt differently. I respect everyone is saying to me. I don't want to fake apologize. I am very upset that people misunderstood what I was saying, and because of that, they were saying I'm anti-Semitic, and I'm denying the Holocaust, and all those other things which would never occur to me to do. I thought we were having a discussion about race, which everyone I think is having. Colbert comes back and says, as the white guy, he observed that racial issues in America have tended to be centered on skin color. And she says, right, that's what it means to me. When you talk about being a racist, you can't call this racism. This was evil. This was based on skin. You couldn't tell who was Jewish. You had to delve deeply and figure it out. And the Goldberg at the end of the segment, she says, quote, folks are angry. I accept that. I did it to myself. And then later on, she said, don't write me anymore. I don't know. I know how you feel. I already know. I get it. And I'm going to take your word for it and never bring it up again. Well, she would give a written apology on Monday. And then we went and had all the things from these other organizations, the ADL, where the ADL joined The View to discuss why Holocaust education has a proven record of reducing intolerance, which is so critical to anti-Semitism, which remains a real and present danger for the Jewish community. So, mea culpa was done. And ADL gets an appearance on The View. More goes on. Man, I'll tell you, it was a Pandora's box that needed to get opened, but she did it. And that's what you do on live TV. And this story, you knew it was going to be talked about. Was it the right idea to go ahead and bring that story up? I don't know. I mean, also the story itself about this Holocaust set novel, and this book being banned. Was this a story that was really something you wanted to go and put on the show? That's the other question you got to ask. It's why is it this Holocaust set novel was a story that people wanted to bring up. This was at one school district that banned the book. I never even heard the book before myself, but that's what he decided to do. Like, here's the thing. A graphic Holocaust set novel, and it's a Tennessee school district. Are we talking about what, elementary, middle, and high school here? Do the kids want to have that book, when it's graphic? Like, is that intended for children? No. So maybe nothing was being brought up about the fact that the book probably was not intended for children. It's not something you want to have in the library in the school. Meanwhile, if the kids wanted to go to the public library and pick it up, I guess they could do that, right? You're not censoring the book. You're telling a Tennessee school district, why do we have this book out here? If the kids want to read it, we shouldn't have it in our school libraries. But meanwhile, if, a government-run public library wants to have that book and it's being made available to them, go right on. Or if they want to go buy the book, you can buy the book. But that's the point. I mean, it's not, I don't know if that's the kind of reading you want to have. Isn't there? There's a lot of other books to have. So this is where I think there's a justification about it. But because of all the political shots going back and forth, which I could care less about, this became a big story, but yet another issue of corporate controversy that need to be warranted. Like, the point is, why go through this? Why have this issue and deal with it? Was this a good idea to have? So another issue that comes across, and Whoopi Goldberg, regardless of all the years she has on the air, we see the consequences of her actions, which could have been worse. I mean, you would think that some people out there, if that happened to somebody, I don't want to do that. Oh, God, I don't want to do that. What if it's the shoes on the other foot? I don't want to do that shoes on the other foot thing. But you know what? She has acquired enough, credit for herself and for her time at the network on that show that it would be a big deal if they let her go altogether. So suspension, that's one of the few times it happened. So, okay, here she is and she's off. But, if it was in radio, if somebody talked like that, I'd probably get fired. But in ABC, when you have such a high position, it's probably how much she gets paid on a regular basis to do that live 11 a.m. weekly show probably says a lot. So, I mean, she's also the main host. She's basically the anchor, because when every time they go to on the show, she's kind of the one that directs and kind of polices the conversation with the rest of the panelists. And that's it. So that's a lot to go on right there, man. I'll tell you what. They wanted to try to go out there. You're trying to catch the interest with hot topics and things like that. I get it. But, man, there's just some stuff that, hard enough to go and say what it is that you can go and talk about and what you can't talk about. But that's the other problem, too. It's like, with the power of corporate, she has allies on her side to take care of her. But then again, what if a content creator says that? They're going to get canceled, or they're going to get fired, or they're going to lose whatever kind of sponsorships or whatever other ways to monetize themselves. Like YouTube, if they had something like that happen and they got reported, that YouTuber, they'd probably go and lose their monetization. They'd probably get their channel shut down. If some other figures would say that on Twitter, they'd probably get canceled. That risk isn't worth taking. There's other things you can talk about. I mean, there's a lot of other things to talk about. Information, I don't know. That's why I believe that, information like that, you could take that up with professors and educators and historians that know this story very well, or organizations that are active to the cause. But for someone like Whoopi Goldberg to go ahead and come out there and make comments that were probably misinformed, but she's a celebrity. This is something she would probably have said if there was a conversation at some kind of a, Hollywood function or whatever. Like Malibu, there's a big party amongst a lot of celebrities or whatever. And this is something that could have come up in conversation, and she might have said this and wouldn't have gotten the blowback, but this is in front of millions of people watching on television. In front of the public. I mean, there's only so much that a corporation will do for you to hold, to have your back. But then things like this happen, and then, you struggle with it. Now, the next story that comes of this is Joe Rogan, who we've talked about extensively on this program. Not because of, and I don't want to talk about all the things going on with him and everything surrounding his discussions on vaccines. I don't want to talk about it. It's not what I'm going to talk about. All I'm going to be aware of is that's the reason of contention to why a number of musical artists who were also on Spotify, that had their catalogs of music up on Spotify, in protest, have decided to pull their music off. And they've done it. Take a story from Washington Post that talks about this. This was this morning they wrote this as I recorded this on Thursday night. Spotify has been engulfed in controversy since rocker Neil Young forced one of the country's largest, how about one of the world's largest streaming services, to choose between him and his popular podcast host, Joe Rogan. Over the past week, Neil Young's protest has prompted other major artists to break up with the company, and some Spotify employees have expressed concerns about his relationship with Rogan. Musicians, long frustrated with how little Spotify pays to play their songs, and hoping the backlash will help force bigger changes. Spotify has announced new misinformation policies, but so far that hasn't dampened criticism of the company. Now, they go through questions that you might ask as to what happened. Now, the Washington Post is, of course, going to go ahead and detail all the things that Joe Rogan has done in terms of saying that he's long courted controversy and prided himself on hosting guests on this podcast that challenge mainstream views. Well, for those of you out there, there's the political slant that I'm not going to worry about, whether it triggers one person or the other. I'm not going to worry about that. I'm going to just glom right over. And so Neil Young decided to go ahead and ask for his music to be taken off of Spotify. Then Joni Mitchell would become the next major artist to join him. She would say that irresponsible people are spreading lies that are costing people their lives, and I stand in solidarity with Neil and the global scientific and medical communities on this issue. Nils Lofgren, who was a guitarist in Crazy Horse and Bruce Springsteen's E Street Band, followed soon after. E Street Band. I thought it was E Street Band. It's E Street. I didn't know that. India Ari then also announced on Instagram she would also pull her music and her podcast song Versation from the service. And she says that Neil Young opened a door that I must walk through. And her reasons were slightly different than Young's. She said she found Rogan problematic for his language around race, and noted the company pays artists of a fraction of the penny while purchasing his podcast for a reported $100 million. And then Neil Young's former bandmates David Crosby, Stephen Stills, and Graham Nash also joined him in abandoning Spotify, citing ethical concerns. Quote, knowingly spreading disinformation during this global pandemic has deadly consequences. This is, okay, by taking their music off of there, it's a gesture. Performative allyship. I mean, it doesn't really affect Spotify's bottom line. I mean, there are people that are probably listening to music of these artists that did listen to it on Spotify, but now it's off. And, if they want to just isolate the audience that wants to listen to them on Spotify, because all they're doing is really just hurting their audience. There's a lot. I mean, how many people are subscribers on Spotify right now? The subscriber count, let me tell you right now, 172 million subscribers. Now, what did happen as a result of what this did, Spotify did have their stock drop 20% on weak subscriber numbers, but it had bounced back. But actually, that's because their forecast had weaker than expected subscriber numbers for the first quarter. So that's what they said it would be, that there would be a drop in subscriber base. Okay. So they took that hit. They have 158 million premium subscribers, and 356 million monthly active users, according to the latest. That was the ratings report back in April of last year. And in October of last year, they said that they had 83.1 million users in the U.S., 44 million or 45 million almost are paid subscribers. And I'm sure there are some of those in the audience that, you have Spotify. You might want to hear their songs. You might want to hear Help Me or Brown Skin or, Southern Man or Cinnamon Girl or whatever the other songs, right? I mean, I get it, but And they're all great artists. Don't get me wrong, Crosby, Still Nash, Southern Cross, or, you think Teach Your Children Well, or Ohio, and all this other stuff. But for this to go on, these are also artists that, they might hope to get a little bit of publicity off of this. I know it sounds very, very dire to do that and very, very petty, but I wouldn't be surprised. Like, there's something to be said about how some artists, they want to stand behind something, and they want to stand behind, I don't know, they want to stand by the Centers for Disease Control and the World Health Organization, I guess. I mean, some of them did try to say that it was disinformation, and they're trying to say, well, look at the doctors and the people that died. I guess so. But, the real contribution would be in terms of any active work they did in terms of supporting causes that would be towards, the heroes, the doctors, the nurses, the medical professionals that have been treating COVID patients this whole time, those that are doing the testing out there. Like, I haven't heard anything about that. It's not like they're putting money where their mouth is. They're taking money off their plate. Now, it's not much money. The thought is that for Spotify, yeah, they're probably not getting paid as much. The royalties are not as much, but that's a fight that you have with Congress. That's Music Modernization Act. There's the MFM Act. There's things that are being put in so that songs that were before 1972 would get paid. There was that was done. I thought that was something that was helping them out. But, when it's been a long time for them, and a number of these artists are decades past their prime stardom, their peak of popularity. Like, it's not right now. These are all established artists, legacy artists. Some are Hall of Famers that have gotten to this point, and they said, you know what? We're gonna make an example out of this. And they probably just have a personal hatred and a vile, response to Joe Rogan. Like, let's just go after Joe Rogan. And Joe Rogan is Spotify. Spotify's Joe Rogan. No, it's not. Spotify just has a host. There are other shows they have on there. And, the whole thing is that Joe Rogan just has an audience that Spotify just bought into and brought him over. Same thing where they had Howard Stern. Same idea. But Spotify is staying behind Joe Rogan because of what he brings to that platform. You know what's funny? I'm a Spotify subscriber, and I haven't listened to Joe Rogan not once since he went to Spotify. I'm not subscribed to him. I don't think there's anything wrong with his show. I think he has some entertaining guests, but I don't listen to that show. I can't listen to 3-4 hours of him just going drawing on. I can't do it. So it's just like other podcasts. For me, some of these long-winded, like, go hours and hours, I can't listen to that. So I'm glad for some of those out there, like on TikTok or Instagram, that'll just give me clips to watch. Or I can find it on YouTube somewhere, and somebody will throw a clip up and I can actually catch it. Otherwise, I can't go through all that. It's just too much. Some podcasts just can't go through that, man. Oh, my God. Imagine me trying to do that. There's something to be said about the vibe they have in a show like that. Like if comedians are getting together or other people getting together and they're doing like 2 hours and they're just vegging, right? And they just put the microphones on and just go. Sure. But I'm the type of I don't want to waste the listeners' time, nor their intelligence, nor, anything like that. I don't want to do that to those people. 60 minutes. That's what I'm going to devote to this show. I think that's, and I know there's people that listen to this show that do not listen past a couple of minutes. And that's okay too. I understand that. But at least the most compelling content I can give you starts first. And then after that, there might be other stories that I hope you'll want to go and continue to listen to because they're also like-minded. I think they're very important. And those are things I want to talk about on a regular basis on this program. So the Broadcasters Podcast is all about. I do this because you know what? I realize what my audience wants of the audience that listens in. Like, I can only expect somebody that can listen in and catch this show. Hopefully they catch shows like this because I'm doing what I'm doing here. I'm bringing up stories that would catch their interest. And maybe, oh, you know what? This show's on and they do this other stuff. And that's my only way of getting, word of mouth advertising for this show. That maybe people will go and catch this show and listen to it and they'll enjoy it. And I'm glad for that. I'm thankful for all of you that do decide to catch this show and listen to it on a regular basis. Thank you for that. Moving on to the story, there's other people that also decided to go and remove their podcasts, which, they're not making money off of it. Okay. Spotify is just a distributor. Like for me, my podcast is on Spotify, but I'm not worried so much about that. Now, meanwhile, even though Joe Rogan's doing his show, there are others that are coming on, like Prince Harry and Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. They're setting up a deal to have Spotify podcasts produced, and they're going to host them. And there were concerns. They made in a statement. Even the White House press secretary made a statement about Spotify's decision to add disclaimers to podcasts, discovering that COVID-19 is a positive step. And she says that our hope that all major tech platforms and all major news sources, for that matter, be responsible and vigilant to ensure the American people have access to accurate information on something as significant as COVID-19. That certainly includes Spotify. Now, Spotify, in this story from Washington Post, this is what they say. Spotify is going to stay behind Rogan because it comes down to money. Corporate. Now, whether you like it or not, this is a corporate decision. Much ago, it's a corporate decision for what CNN and Warner Media decided to do with Jeff Zucker, to what ABC News decided to do with Whoopi Goldberg, which is the whole intent of this show tonight. Spotify has been clear about its intentions to own the podcasting space, and Rogan is one of its biggest stars. The show attracts about 11 million listeners. He posts 4 to 5 episodes per week, and they generally run past the 3-hour mark. More than 15 hours of engagement from each one weekly from a single show. So when he does that, he's doing like a 5-day-a-week format, basically, and that's like a talk show every week, like a radio talk show format, almost like that. Young attracted a little more than 6 million listeners each month, and a listener can be counted as someone who listened to Heart of Gold or Cortez the Killer a single time. Young's music can also be heard on other platforms. Meanwhile, Rogan is exclusive to Spotify. You need Spotify to listen to Rogan. You can hear Young just about anywhere. So that's part of where, this doesn't make much of a blip, except for the fact that these artists decided to make their point known and publicize such. Now, there are others that talk about how Spotify, it's difficult to get their music taken off because of complicated copyright issues. Not everyone could just pull their music off. Now, David Crosby talked about his music. He couldn't remove it because I'm no longer controlling it, or else I would support Neil. And so there are song copyrights that are in here that have to be talked about as well. But then the real story behind this, which is really, Joe Rogan is really just a Trojan horse for the artists to come in to talk about the real story about this, which is really what Spotify is concerning about themselves about, plus the artists. It's not about Joe Rogan. You could say it's partly because they have an animus towards him, and that's okay. But really, the artists are using this to say, okay, so you care more about a podcast host. They might be disseminating misinformation, according to them, instead of taking care of us, the musicians, who came here first. Eve 6 frontman Max Collins talked to the Washington Post, and he says, quote, "People are finally blasting an interrogation lamp on Spotify. It's my hope that whatever side of the culture war, the Rogan Neil Young thing a person may land, that people can be sympathetic to the struggle of working artists trying to get fair pay. For each dollar of revenue Spotify earns, 58.5 cents goes to the owner of a song's sound recording, the record label. Usually, Spotify keeps 29.38 cents of each dollar. 6.12 cents goes to whoever owns publishing rights using the songwriter. 6 cents go to mechanical rights, often but not always owned by the songwriter. So artists are roughly paid between 0.0033 and 0.0054 cents each time their song is played. But like this, T-Pain actually tweeted this in December, the rapper. It takes the average artist roughly 315 streams of a song to earn $1 from Spotify. Every other service pays better rates than Spotify. Napster pays the highest rates, believe it or not. So in other words, the songwriters, for a song to earn $1 for them, the song has to be played 53 times before the artist earns $1. Now, the other thing, too, is that Spotify is getting more money off of podcasts and all the advertising revenue they're able to get off of that, too. And they've been going after that much more than ever. Right now, Spotify overtook Apple Podcasts last year to become the largest podcast provider in the U.S. Now, Spotify did respond in kind, even though they didn't do anything in terms of the Joe Rogan experience and Joe Rogan himself. They did say that they would add special warnings and links to reputable information to podcast episodes dealing with the pandemic. And that's what Facebook and YouTube have used when faced with their own creators promoting misinformation or ideas about the pandemic that can contradict scientific consensus. Daniel Ek, who's been, quite a CEO for this company, quote, "It's too early to know what the impact may be, and usually when we have controversies in the past, those are measured in months and not days. We're trying to balance creative expression with the safety of users, and of course, this is a very complicated issue." So, that's the story. And it's how people are handling it. There's some other links I put in there as well if you want to go and learn what the whole story comes about. There was another story the Washington Post put out as an op-ed asking about what the Neil Young Spotify movement teaches us. And this is Kathleen Parker that wrote this. And she says in the story, needless to say, Rogan isn't going anywhere, and Spotify has made some public relations adjustments. From now on, when Rogan talks about COVID, Spotify will offer a warning label of sorts. And Rogan said he'll try to be more balanced in the future. He said that on an Instagram post that he made earlier this week. It surely helps that Rogan recently signed a deal with Spotify. It's all about the money, you see, he says. She says, excuse me. She also goes on to say, in a more perfect world, there would be just one set of objective facts and one message to achieve the best health results possible. But we've become a nation of conspiracists and disbelievers. You know why, Kathleen? The media. The information that's coming out there now is bad all over. It's biased. People just can't give information anymore. It's impossible. And social media has also made it worse. Let's just be honest. Before social media, these news agencies could control and disseminate what information can go out there. But now they're competing with them, and they're getting more salacious and more tabloidistic and more yellow journalism style, as of William Randolph Hearst, more than ever. We're in a world war of information across multiple media platforms, and the winners often appear to be those who would feed superstition and starve the truth. Okay, but this is projection. When she talks about this, feeding superstition and starving the truth, well, you could say that that's being done over there, but you can't not blame yourself too. Okay, what they're saying is there are no winners. Okay, everybody in the media is losers, and they're all guilty of feeding superstition and starving the truth. Okay, I absolutely know there are people out there. If you see them, the ones that are mask worn right now, and may not have taken the vaccine yet, not because they're trying to make a political point, but because they don't know what to do and they're afraid of what the vaccine will do. Okay, those people, you try to ask them what they've learned about the pandemic, man, I bet you they wouldn't have a million different stories. You know why? Because the media didn't get the story straight. They decided to go on a different agenda. They decided to fearmonger, and that's what you've done to people. And 10 years from now, when we still have people wearing masks, not because if somebody feels sick and they're outside and they don't want to let anybody else infect themselves with a cold or whatever virus they have, they're doing it because they're still scared that this COVID vaccine or this COVID virus is still so dangerous as it was in February 2020 that health science officials don't have a good grasp of what's going on, and they're scared they're going to die. And they feel like there's no hope. They feel like they're stuck in their homes. They're in a dystopian nightmare. And that was created and fostered by the media. And what media? Corporate media. Corporate media, that, by the way, as Kathleen Parker writes in here, it's all about the money, folks. Oh, it's all about the money you see. Let me quote her correctly. The media is the same way, Kathleen. You do the same exact thing. So don't get on your pedestal and tell me that you're high and mighty and sanctimonious. No, you're not. I mean, you are sanctimonious, but you can't say that you are not without blame. Do not cast the first stone. Judge not, lest ye shall be judged. Now, she says this. Rogan is free to express his beliefs and interview whomever he chooses. When people have determined that they can't trust the Center for Disease Control and Prevention and our nation's designated expert, Anthony Fauci, we are in uncharted territory. But we can also talk about the fact that these organizations, they've been inconsistent on directives and guidelines for the public. We can all say that. We can all see that. That's not political. That's just what it is. CDC has said one thing, then they flipped and said something else, and then they flipped back. They've been inconsistent. It's a government agency. They're flawed too. And unfortunately, Dr. Anthony Fauci is a bureaucrat. Okay? Who's also, he is a spokesperson. There's only so much that can be said about what he's actually done, in terms of the internal makeup of what's going on here. He's just speaking on behalf of National Institute of Health. Okay. And, designated, well, that's, who did that? Okay. But that's where we are with things right now, and, it sucks. And this constant issue of corporate media, what they've done, is bad. It's sad to see all this go on. And, that's something I had to go and talk about, where it's like, one more story I want to talk about here. There's other stuff on radio that I can just hold off to later, but I'll leave it for now. I'll just give you one more story that I found from the Miami Herald that I thought was very much in line with what this Kathleen Parker op-ed from the Washington Post actually gave. Miami Herald writes this, and this is from Natalia Ortiz. Broadcast news industry is exploiting its own, which threatens the public trust. When they don't care about themselves, then what does that say about the people they report to? So now she refers to a story about a station in West Virginia where there was a reporter that was hit by a car while reporting live on air. She continued working and reporting alone after the incident, and saying it was, in the story they said it was a sad reminder of the exploitative practices that have become commonplace in the newsroom. And it left her wondering about the fragile state of the industry, about the implication that these stresses have on our ability to properly and responsibly bring information to the public. The practice of sending local broadcast reporters into the field alone to shoot and edit their stories began more than a decade ago. Man, more than that, because I remember back 20 years ago when I worked at WPBF Channel 25. It was when the cameras were much more convenient to hold, the DVR cameras. They weren't as big as they once were. And then you had the equipment. You already started seeing where I would see certain reporters editing their own footage after it was shot. Or they went and shot the footage, did the interviews, and they went back to the truck and they went ahead and edited it and sent it back to the, by microwave, back to the studio. Or sent it through satellite. Yeah, no more of the reporters just doing the report and getting the story. Now they have to do all the other work in order to keep their jobs. Now, they were called multimedia journalists, or MMJs, but now the technology has enabled news crews to transmit live with only a cell phone or tablet, so the most recent responsibility to add multimedia journalist plates is to produce a live shot while working alone. The pandemic has exacerbated the issue, and solo live shots are now the norm in many areas of the nation. Now, she mentions that her skills of this gave her the 360-degree prowess and confidence that served me as well as I ventured into the world of documentary production. But newsroom leaders still need to be called out for raising expectations so high that they unnecessarily put reporters in dangerous circumstances. As journalists, no one understands better how important it is to keep the public informed. However, I worry by exploiting the sensational angle of the story instead of confronting the supposed occupational hazard disguised as heroism. Some national anchors perpetuate the expectation that broadcast reporters must continue to submit to dangerous situations so the station can save a buck. Despite all the newly acquired skill sets, multimedia journalists are paid the least among their reporter colleagues. The entire practice screams of the lack of value placed on these professionals' work and their lives. Also makes for sloppy journalism, a problem that will only add to the public's already deteriorating trust that has debilitated our democracy in recent years. At an age when journalists in the United States are being scrutinized and villainized, justifiably so, I'd say, more than ever in modern history, newsroom leaders should stand firmly behind them, the journalists, protecting them from as much professional and physical harm as possible. Instead, our heroism, like that of our teachers, first responders, service workers, and many others who have been risking their lives over the past years, remains only as relevant as the last media cycle. Change starts with us, and we must do better for the sake of our profession and for the future of our country. Now, Natalia Ortiz is a award-winning journalist and documentary producer working for NBC Latino and host for Comcast Newsmakers in Florida and Washington, D.C., and she worked as a reporter and anchor at Telemundo and NBC stations in New York City and South Florida. What a wonderful story, Natalia. Kudos to you for writing that. Also, another thing in the story, she mentioned how Savannah Guthrie on the Today Show spoke about the story and referred to Yorgi as she's my hero. But Natalia says the comment that Savannah Guthrie made totally missed the mark. The least significant matter in that situation is that the reporter's on-air performance. The real conversation, the stress and demands being placed on journalists are untenable and hazardous. And that's how I'm going to leave this show tonight. Controversy, conflict, and so much more going on. Controversy, conspiracy, and conflict. Corporate media. Will it ever change? Will it ever fix itself? I don't know. But I don't expect it to. But we can stay on this and talk about all we want and make this point across. So I hope you appreciate this broadcast tonight as I put it out there. There's a lot more to talk about. There's more about new music and radio and stuff like that. I don't know if I'll get to it or not, but, maybe there's other stuff that's going to happen. But I have a few other things that are coming up, and I'll bring all this up. There was actually a story I wanted to bring up. That might be the one I leave up for next week, because the radio stuff, I think I'm not going to bring it up. It's fine. But what I will put up here is news organizations are increasing diversity efforts, and there's a Medill survey finding that journalists report notable changes, including new training programs, hiring procedures, and policies around language, according to a survey, and that's from Poynter.org. And we'll talk about that probably next week. I think I'll bring it up then. In the meantime, thanks for listening in, as you always do, to the Broadcasters Podcast. Till next week, remember that content is king, and the control of your content is in your hands.
Thank you for listening to the Broadcasters Podcast. Find all the links to subscribe to the show by going to broadcasterspodcast.com. And don't forget to check out the King of Podcasts wrestling program, the Wrestling is Real Podcast, exclusively at wrestlingisreal.com.